The last 6 months, U.S. companies, including Tractor Supply, Lowe's, L-O-W-E-S, Walmart, Ford, Molson Coors, Harley-Davidson, have all walked back diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. They've ended participation in human rights campaigns, corporate equality indices, and stopped sponsoring pride parades, donations to LGBTQ organizations. Nissan is the most recent to take action, now formalizing a review process to approve all sponsorships on a case-by-case basis and adjusting required employee training. Join us now, Robby Starbuck, film director. It says here, conservative activists. Robby, is that fair? Are you conservative? Do we talk? I don't think we don't label nearly as many people liberal as we do conservative when we're talking about what they do. But you have been involved in trying to roll back some of these things at these companies.
Yeah, I would say calling me conservative activist is fair in the context that that's my personal beliefs. But in terms of this activism to stop DEI and wokeness in corporate America, it's not motivated by my personal beliefs. It's motivated by fairness, because if it was motivated by my personal beliefs, then after President Trump won the election in such great numbers, I would have shifted our focus and said, you know what, let's go even more forceful and let's shift our beliefs into the corporate workspace, which I didn't do, because we do believe in fairness. And I think that the workplace in corporate America has gotten way too partisan, way too divisive. And if we all agree our country is divided, well, then let's look at what changed. And what changed is we politicized every institution in our country, our kids' schools and corporations. If we want to rein that back, we want people to get along again, we need to remove this stuff from the corporate America.
I would, Andrew, I would bet if you were to talk about someone who wants DEI and wants to institute those, I don't think you'd call that a liberal activist, would you? I just think that would be someone who's mainstream, according to most people. You know what I mean?
But Robby's...
he did, but he said, but this part of what he does is not based on conservatism. It's based on something that's separate and equal that he's, I think is what he's saying. Did you really have anything to do with Nissan? What did you talk to the company this time, Robby?
Yes. Yeah, no, I reached out to them. We had a good conversation. We were fact checking sort of our story and investigation, and they were open to change right away. So we were able to, come to an understanding in terms of what those changes would be, and then we reported them out. And I think the company's going to be better off for it. I mean, I know their stock in that 24-hour period went up to a degree that it had not gone up in the past year. So I think that's probably good news for them. And that's actually a consistent theme with every company that we've changed, except for Harley-Davidson, who I'd say is the worst of the companies that we've exposed. Every other company has had their stock go up after announcing that they've dropped these crazy policies.
And I would think that you've gotten involved as an activist, but the companies themselves may have been, some of them, even looking for an excuse to backtrack on some of this because they shot themselves in the foot, whether it's Bud Light or whether it's, I mean, I don't know, Target, you can run down Disney, you can run down a list of companies, and people will push back on me whenever I say you go woke, you go broke. But maybe it's just, causation is not correlation, or correlation is not causation. But a lot of companies have suffered that have gone what some people might think are overboard on wokeness.
That's exactly right. I think after Bud Light, a lot of companies learned a lesson because Bud Light got lucky. They had a market segment where they owned many different names of beers. Imagine had they only owned Bud Light. The company would have been in extremely serious financial trouble because of the losses they took. And so companies who don't have that large product category with many different names and are maybe defined by one brand or two brands, they have to look at themselves in the mirror and say, are we willing to gamble on this extremely micro audience of far left activists we're trying to please and potentially lose this giant group of people who are consistent consumers and have been for decades? And I think many companies are coming to the realization that's not a good idea. It's not a good bet. And that's why you're seeing so many companies work with us to get rid of these policies. And, I think you're right to some degree. There's some who are happy to have an excuse, really, of this, movement to move it. However, there's other ones who were true believers and did not want to give up these policies, like Harley-Davidson. And so we had to do reporting every single day for 3.5 weeks until they finally changed their mind. And so So, there's sort of different categories out there. But in the end, I believe, especially after this election, we're going to see a cascade of companies in 2025 dropping these policies because ultimately they do nothing good for your company. They're causing division, employee on employee, and you're losing money. You're spending millions upon millions of dollars to do things that are just fundamentally unwise for any business to do.
Robby, let me ask you a philosophical question, and not a business question, and hopefully not a political question. So I think we could argue that some of the DEI efforts, beyond perhaps going too far, that there was what you might describe as a cancel culture around these issues, even internally in some of these companies for a long time. On the other side, there's an argument being made today that actually what you're doing to some degree is also part of a cancel culture, right? What you're doing is you're going to these companies and saying, if you don't make these changes, I am going to go effectively create a boycott from customers, not typically shareholders, but customers against your company, and that unto itself also is an act of this sort of unique cancel culture that we're living in. It's just the opposite kind of cancel culture we lived in maybe 2 or 3 years ago. What do you think of that idea?
I think that essentially anybody making that argument is saying, Robby, why don't you and your side lay down your values and just let the other side pummel you into submission? I mean, I think that's kind of a ludicrous argument. But beyond that, no, I mean, we don't go to these companies actually and blackmail them or shake them down. We just go and we fact check a story, and I put it out to an audience of people that are very activated consumers.
Robby, you know two things. One is that a lot of the folks inside these companies, they do think it's a shakedown. You may not think it's a shakedown, but on their side, if we were to get it discovery, you would see emails and text messages going back and forth saying, the shakedown is here, Robby is arrived, we got to do something. And the second part of it, and this goes to the point that I think I was trying to make with Joe, or that Joe was trying to make with me, where we disagree, is as part of, I'm not saying a shakedown, but as part of your efforts, you're saying you're doing these for business reasons. The truth is that the way you're doing it, the threat, if you will, the implicit threat is that customers are going to stop buying from them because you are going to, quote, expose and or encourage customers to stop being customers because of these policies, correct?
Listen, I can't get into the psychological delusions of certain executives who may believe or think certain things, but I can tell you this. There is a financial impact to me putting my voice to something, and that's been seen very clearly by the companies who have been on the other end of this. Tractor Supply's case, they lost almost $3 billion in market cap when we did our story. John Deere lost about $10 billion, and it goes on and on and on down the line. So companies are wise enough to understand that a large group of people and investors are listening to what I'm saying, and that they believe the same thing I do. All I am is a megaphone for normal people and the gripes they have about these ludicrous
Robby,
policies.
How you shouldn't be able to say what you're saying. I'm just saying it's a, but I think this goes back to the political piece. When he said he's a conservative activist, I think it just, let's be clear, he's a conservative activist because that's what this is. I'm not saying your position is wrong, Robby. I'm just saying it is what it is.